Hey, how's it going? Welcome to the Football Diary podcast. Manchester United have won the FA Cup. Absolutely buzzing at that result. Added a beautiful gloss to an otherwise pretty miserable season for me and Dave on this podcast. I can't remember the last time we actually celebrated this much, to be fair. But we'll be discussing how United managed to pull that massive result off against Man City, what this means for Erik Ten Hag's future as well. So many questions still about him and about this Man United side generally now after probably their best performance from every player on the pitch this season. Also, Southampton are back in the Premier League. They beat Leeds United in the Championship playoff final. We'll talk about how they'll adapt to Premier League life next season and what it means for Leeds going forward. And also, Mauricio Pochettino's parted ways with Chelsea. Is that the right decision? And what the hell is going on at that club? Never ceases to amaze me how weird Chelsea can be. But we'll delve straight in, Dave, with Manchester United and that really unforeseen result at Wembley. Nobody really expected too much out of the game, did they? So to beat Man City, but not only beat them, but in really convincing fashion, it's such a satisfying way to end the season for United fans, isn't it?
Crazy. I think everyone thought it was a foregone conclusion, this game. And I think that's what makes it all the sweeter this time round. That is, they've managed to prove the doubters wrong. What a performance, and just where that's come from. Where's that team been all season? It just seems like that kind of performance. That's our best game of the season for me. Just the way that we actually performed for the 90 minutes. There wasn't any real sort of dramatic collapses where we've had a period of pressure. For 10, 15, 20 minutes towards the end of the game, we've completely fallen off. We, can perform really consistently, and just the quality of some of the performances. But collectively, it was a great performance from the whole team.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get my head around, because tactically, we know what United can do at their worst, don't we? And this was every single player at their best. And we questioned, didn't we, Miles, at the start of the game, and looked at the lineup and saw a lack of striker there. And we were like, that's a kind of an odd formation he's playing. But in hindsight, I guess not playing that forward and having that focal point really confused City's defence a little bit. And it allowed United to play that like free-flowing counter-attack that we kind of hoped we'd see from a Ten Hag side all season, but never really did. And it was almost like peak counter-attacking United in some ways, wasn't it? Defended really organised and just sucker punched City twice.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's a lot of people that talk about how counter-attacking seems like a dangerous style for United to play, because the majority of teams will play Man United and give them too much respect and give them most of the ball. So consistently, it's been quite hard for United to get that style right. But in this game, they definitely did. And I think it's because the individual performances were all spot on. Like, we talked about someone like Amrabat, who looked completely out of his depth for most of the season and the shadow of the player that United tried to sign. And he controlled the game here alongside Mainu. It was huge. And then obviously having Martinez and Varane back together as well meant that United had that sturdy base, allowing them to counter effectively when they did transition quite quickly. And yeah, you're right. The lack of a centre forward even seemed quite surprising. But what it did enable was just Rashford and Garnacho to stretch City as wide as they could and allowed Fernandes and Mainu to actually get further forward and create more, which was really effective, actually, particularly in the first half. They obviously went out to try and kill the game early, and it worked excellently for them.
I think the quality of the goals, although the first one was quite fortuitous, really, Dave, I think that amount of pressure that Garnacho was applying, making that run constantly throughout that first sort of 20, 30 minutes, kind of paid off, didn't it, in the end, because the confusion between goalkeeper and defender was there for all to see, and Garnacho waited for his chance patiently. I think he made that run so many times but got cut off, so when it did come off, he knew exactly what to do, and to see the ball hit the back of the net was nerve-wracking in some respects because it's still so much football to play, but it was more than United deserved, really. It was exactly kind of the way the game was going at that time.
Yeah, and I think there was a real emphasis on the extra width in this game. You saw it with both goals, particularly the second one. Obviously, that beautiful ball from Rashford really stretched that Man City defence, and there were multiple times Garnacho almost seemed like he was hugging the touchline a little bit more than what he usually does. But then, because of that system that we played with the false nine, it kind of brought the extra midfielder into play. Which we saw, obviously, Mainu finishing that move off beautifully with the second goal. It seems like it gave them a little bit more freedom in a way. And I think out of possession, when we were obviously behind the ball, it felt like we did have that little bit more solidity than probably we usually would. And I just don't know whether these last few games, because he's done it obviously the last couple of games where he's reverted to this formation, and actually we look so much more structured in and out of possession, a lot more fluid as well. And it almost feels a little bit similar actually to when Solskjaer was at the club and we were playing more as a counter-attacking team. I don't think there's as much emphasis placed on, having possession, having the majority of possession. It's just controlling those moments in games which need to be controlled, and I think we did it brilliantly.
Yeah, tactically, I think we got it spot on, or Ten Hag did, just by having the play so narrow, didn't he? And it gave no space in the middle for Foden. You rarely heard of Kevin De Bruyne. In fact, he got hooked quite early, didn't he, in the second half? And Erling Haaland didn't really have a sniff, apart from when he rattled the bar in the second half as things started to open up a bit. So, yeah, it was a really suffocating game in the middle of the park, wasn't it, Miles? And it's only in the second half, really, where obviously Pep Guardiola kind of acknowledged that he needed to change something and brought Jeremy Doku on for one, who really tried to attack United down that side. And him and Wan-Bissaka had a right ding-dong of a battle throughout the whole second half, didn't they? Which I thought Wan-Bissaka did brilliantly with, amongst many players that had like a 10 out of 10 game, really, for them.
Yeah, and it obviously needed to be, didn't it? It's funny because we've talked about the fragility of Man United recently and how they just leak chances every 5 seconds. And actually, in this game, Man City, they had a period in the second half where they started to really look threatening. But I think they had 4 shots on target in the entire game. So that's not what you anticipated going into the match. So there was a lot of us talking about it being an absolute foregone conclusion, it being a write-off and not even needing to watch the game. So I think performances like that should give some hope. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because then you look at that side and you think, well, Varane's going in the summer. We know that Wan-Bissaka can be quite inconsistent. Martinez has had his injury problems. You don't know how consistent that's going to be. There's a lot of pressure being put on Mainu and Garnacho to carry them quite far forward. And they're still young, and you never know really how that's going to turn out. But it's good to see that this United still exists and existed under Ten Hag, who obviously was quite spiky after the game, and understandably so. So it leaves us open to thinking whether he's even going to be there to celebrate this for long.
Well, I don't know which channel you watched the game on, but I watched the BBC's coverage, and afterwards, obviously, Alan Shearer and Gary Lineker got criticised quite a bit, didn't they, for being so direct with their line of questioning about his future when he just won the FA Cup. And I kind of agree to an extent, but everybody's asking the question, aren't they? Because we know what happened with Louis van Gaal, won the FA Cup, and then moments later, I think it was the next day, they announced his sacking. I don't think it'll be that clean cut with this situation, because there are so many injuries that United have had to contend with, haven't they, Dave? And I think seeing players like Varane and Martinez just makes you wonder, what if, doesn't it? But is it as simple as those key players that were missing that United have had to kind of almost work around so many times this season, that United have dropped off so much? Because still, Ten Hag could have done so much differently, couldn't he, this season?
No doubt they would have made a big difference. But I also feel as though if it had been a little bit more measured with his approach and probably pat the midfield more like he has done these last 2 or 3 games, then we would have definitely had more points on the board. And he just seemed a little bit stubborn in his approach, and he didn't want to change. And when obviously we've conceded the most shots on target, I think, and in the league, that wouldn't have been the case if he'd have played Amrabat in midfield with Mainu. Although I think he did have his fitness issues, but surely there's got to be someone there who can do a role. And it just shows, although this might not be the kind of football we're looking to pursue, obviously, it sounds like that's not the case with what Ineos are looking for. But for the time being, that's what would have been productive for us, and that's what would have got results. And the league campaign would have been different.
Well, that's what I mean. This game felt like we'd been coaching for this moment all week. Like, we'd really worked hard to get that shape right. Why wasn't that the case in any other game, regardless of who he was putting out on the pitch? And I think that's the question that Alan Shearer was frustrated about. Like, this was a great game to watch United match the opposition with the right approach. All it took was some coaching. Why wasn't that present before? And I get why Ten Hag was spiky, but it does raise questions about his tactical ability, his in-game management and things like that I think have been answered with this game. But is it too little too late for you, Dave? Are you Ten Hag out at this point? How do you feel?
I'm neither here or there, to be honest, because I don't really know
Give
what
us
the answer
an opinion.
is.
On the fence.
I don't know what the answer is. I think, like we've mentioned, haven't we, over the last couple of weeks, that I don't think there's any real sort of clear answer there. And I don't know if there's that perfect coach that is available at the minute. Obviously, there's been a lot of coaches linked this week, haven't there? The likes of De Zerbi, McKenna, Pochettino, and even Thomas Frank, I think. But does any of those names kind of fill you with confidence that they could come in and do as good a job or even better?
I think the majority would.
But a lot of them are untested as well at this level. That's the thing. Obviously, Pochettino is probably, and obviously Thomas Tuchel as well. But I'm not convinced. So
I think the only thing that switched me slightly in favour of Ten Hag is the bond he seems to have with some of the younger players in the team. And after the game, you could see him sort of embracing them and giving them advice. And he did that after the Carabao Cup final. And you don't see that side of Ten Hag very often. He seems quite a distant, cold character to the press, doesn't he? But behind the scenes, maybe he's got a deeper relationship with some of the players. Who knows? But I'm more Ten Hag in now than I was. But as an outsider looking in, Miles, what's your opinion, mate?
I think you can't be. I think it's too reactionary. I don't think you can base the future of the club on that one performance. Let's not forget, this is an excellent achievement. I don't want to underplay it, but scraped through the semi-final against Coventry. You've had the worst Premier League finish you've ever had. There's nothing in it that tells me that Ten Hag knows how to take this team forward. And I think there are people available now that I think would do a better job. I think as soon as Pochettino became available, United have had interest in him before. I think he's a better coach than Ten Hag. I think you could make progress there. It's not necessarily the elite level that will catch you up with Man City, but it's definitely a step in the right direction because that manager doesn't seem to exist right now. I'm not really sure who would take you much further. I think if it had been the likes of McKenna, that's too soon. And obviously it looks like now he's going to sign a new deal with Ipswich, which is, I think, excellent. I think really smart from him and great for Ipswich coming up. And I think for Man United now, it gives them time to assess him a bit further at a higher level and whether he does have the potential to kick on even further. So if they do want to watch him and give Ten Hag another year, fine. But then you're admitting that you're basically writing off another year, I think, if you keep him. Because there's nothing to say that he's going to get them any further up the league than he has this year, really.
Well, even the fact that we've got so many injuries and that there were key players and that seeing even a few of them back in this game, you could see what the potential is. Does that not make you think what could have been and what could be? Realistically,
the injuries to key players, which of them are any good? I know that sounds harsh, but Luke Shaw, definitely, but he's going to be injured again, let's be honest. Martinez, definitely.
Huge.
Outside of that, Fernandes has played most of the season. Garnacho's played most of the season. Mainu stayed injury-free. Onana's stayed injury-free. No one else that's been injured really is that pivotal. I'll be honest, I think Ten Hag has absolutely blown the injuries out of the water and made that like a really big talking point to try and save some face. Because if you look at a lot of the top sides around the league that have contended with those sort of problems, at times it's been to more influential players and they've still managed to kick on and do better than this. Like, look at some of the injuries Liverpool had, where there was a period where it looked like they didn't have a centre-back for a while. They still finished third.
Yeah.
I've talked endlessly about the injuries Villa have had this year. Fourth, I really think Ten Hag has made so much out of that, and understandably so. I can't see anything that tells me next year Man United are pushing for top four.
No. I think the worry for me and the biggest kind of negative against Ten Hag is his recruitment's been so poor and the amount of money is spent on players that were meant to be his players. I think the exception of Onana, who I think's been fantastic. Anthony for a start. I can't see Anthony getting in the team again, especially if Ten Hag goes. No. Mason Mount is still obviously a question mark for me. We spent big money on him. We needed centre-backs in the summer, clearly. That's obvious now. And I just think that was misguided of him to kind of insist on his players when there was such obvious gaps in the team. So I think he's got that massively wrong. Whether a director of football changes that, I don't know.
I think the team's been a little bit unbalanced as well, though. Talk about, obviously, Luke Shaw there. I think Wan-Bissaka, obviously, did well in this game to nullify that threat. But then when you're lacking that kind of balance between attack and obviously in defence, which he's just not very good going forward, is he? Let's be honest. And on the left, then you're basically taking your player out of their preferred position. So you're playing Dallo at right back, and then you move in Wan-Bissaka to left back. And I think there's just been some strange decisions throughout the course of the season that have.
Yeah.
I think we've misused players, but I think we've also. It's been to the detriment of the balance of the team, and it has actually disrupted the team as well. So I don't think he can cover himself in glory, to be honest, Ten Hag, with some of the decisions he's made. I think lack of use of players as well. I think Amad Diallo should have had way more game time than what he's had. He's shown what he can do when he's obviously come in the back end of the season. Has looked like one of our best attacking players at times. So yeah, there's a lot to sort out. The recruitment side as well. That shouldn't be on the coach now. That there should be recruitment. The recruitment team should be handling that side of things. And I think it's kind of come to light that he probably shouldn't be making those decisions.
Yeah, I think some of
the
moves.
Do you not think Pochettino would be better for you?
I think it kind of changes the momentum that a cup win might have gained. I think he has built relationships, Ten Hag, with some of the players in the squad, and that's a positive thing. But having said that, when Pochettino was available last time around, we went for Ten Hag instead, didn't we? Obviously.
Yeah.
And I was advocating for Pochettino for a while, but I was worried he was damaged goods because he went to PSG. I feel like that's probably more the case now that he's been to Chelsea. However, his big asset, his development of youth, his coaching of players, creating a family environment within a club. Chelsea's not the place to do that. I think United could be. So maybe. Do you know what? I'm kind of indifferent to him staying or going and Pochettino coming. I don't think it's much of a risk either way in some ways.
While we're there, should we? I don't know. We've talked about the cup win. I think it's amazing, but do we talk about Chelsea now? Because those two seem to have gone hand in hand most of the season, United and Chelsea.
True, yeah.
And then one of them has ended the season in much better form in the league, kicked on, finished far higher than I think any of us anticipated. The other's gone on to win a cup. But it's Chelsea that have gone on and sacked a manager. What the heck are they thinking?
I don't think it's a sacking, though. I think it's a mutual termination. I think that he's walked away. He's raised concerns about the way the club's going and the direction they're taking. And it was always meant to be a project, this job, wasn't it, Chelsea? Because the investment they've had in their players. And it needed a coach, I think, who was going to see that through. And I think the progress Chelsea made in the last 2-3 months of the season is proof that Pochettino's starting to make a difference. So you're right. Yeah. I think the fact that they've just let him go and then started to be linked with coaches like Enzo Maresca, who is wholly unproven at the top level, is mental, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if you had made this decision 3 months ago, it makes sense to me because results were looking poor. The team really wasn't clicking. If you want to move on then, it kind of... I still think it would have been too early, but it would have been a very Chelsea thing to do. To watch them kick on, improve massively, and then do it at the end of the season, basically starting that whole process again and meaning that this season was completely worthless to them. I cannot get my head around that. What it means is someone new is going to come in. They're going to need to put their stamp on the squad. That's going to take them another few months, particularly when it looks like it's going to be Maresca, who's really unproven. So it's going to take him longer to get that system and philosophy embedded, you would imagine. You're just starting that whole thing again and again and again. They did it with Potter. They've done it with Pochettino. Now they're going to do it with Maresca. Let's be honest. By the end of next season, they'll have Mourinho back or something ridiculous. Like it won't last. The appointment of Maresca, I cannot get my head around why they think that would be a better fit for them than Pochettino was. Currently.
No, I think there's a veneer of respectability because he's a disciple of Pep Guardiola, right? And I think it's the same.
That's embarrassing.
Vincent Kompany, to an extent, has gone to Bayern Munich, and I think it is that link between Guardiola-style football, and I think Chelsea deludedly think they're going to get that with Maresca.
I think obviously because Arteta has kicked on and done quite well at Arsenal as well, there is like this precedent being set. But how many major coaches have we seen come through? Who was Ferguson's best assistant as a manager on his own? Rennie Mullenstein didn't have that good a career, did he?
Carlos Queiroz, Steve McLaren, there's loads that failed,
It's bizarre looking at that as being your model. And when you're trying to kick on and get to the top four, looking at what Maresca's done at Leicester. Bear in mind, Leicester nearly threw it away at one point and were definitely in a very favourable position in that league from the start. Like, I don't know. Look, I don't watch enough Championship to say that I think it's a terrible appointment, but I am really surprised that Chelsea have done this now.
Enzo Maresca, though, Dave, leaving Leicester for Chelsea, I think obviously Leicester will get a handsome compensation package. Leaves them in a bit of a turmoil at the end of the season, doesn't it? I mean, they'll be looking to kind of start the season strongly. Whether they have a points deduction or not, we don't know. But thinking of it from the Chelsea side, what do you think Chelsea are thinking? Miles has been quite vocal about the way that club is run anyway, but after the back of a really successful end to the season, it feels even more inconceivable that they get rid of Poch, doesn't it? Or don't at least fight to keep him and give him what he needs.
It's been reported today they want a manager who can come in and play a possession-based style of play. And, you know, we've seen that from Maresca throughout the season in his first season, obviously, with Leicester. But I've seen a lot of reaction from Leicester fans, to be honest. And some of them are sort of not really gutted that he's going.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of them saying, obviously, he's been quite stubborn this season and he's kind of had one plan. He's got a plan A and not a plan B. And I think if you're being smart about it, you want a manager who can adapt, especially to when you're coming up to a new league, obviously in the Premier League. I think you've got to be a little bit smarter of how you manage games, especially against some of the better teams. I think you've got to be, because we've seen teams come up in the past who come up and try and play the football, and vulnerable, obviously more defensively, and they just get, they ship goals. And so I don't think it's the end of the world for Leicester. I think there's some talented young coaches out there. Obviously, it'd be interesting to see who they bring in. But obviously, there's the likes of Graham Potter's out there. De Zerbi's out there. He'll probably be in a rush to get back into Premier League football.
Not that level. Come on.
Rob Edwards.
You said David Moyes earlier.
Well, yeah.
I don't think that's the worst shout for Leicester to try and stabilise. I think that could be quite a good idea.
I think where Leicester are now is, especially, they could be faced with a point deduction if what we believe is to be true, which would be a real shame. But I think they probably need a manager who can just come in and do the nitty gritty, and just, even if it means if it's not the prettiest football to begin with, and just get back into the swing of things and kind of keep their position in the league. That's all they'll want, I think.
Do you know what, though? If they'd have stayed with Pochettino at Chelsea, you could conceivably start your pre-season predictions thinking maybe they should aspire for top four. Maybe, with some momentum and maybe a signing or two in key areas, they could achieve that. They finished so strongly, and they've got a really good spirit as a team now, Chelsea, which, for a group of players that have kind of been mashed together over the course of the last few transfer windows, that was what was missing. And I think the fact that Poch has got that out of the team, in some ways, Miles, makes this feel ridiculous, doesn't it? I think the disruption this is going to cause to the squad, and I've seen a few of the players say on social media how shocked they are at the decision, how sad they are, how grateful they are to Pochettino. What must they be thinking, man?
Yeah, I can't get my head around that part of it either, because with the momentum they had in the league, they were up there in the top four teams anyway, coming since New Year. And then you consider that Villa will be contending with the Champions League and the league for the first time, so you don't know how their domestic campaign's going to go. Liverpool are going to have a brand new manager in, and that could go anyway. So there's spaces available, it feels like, to compete for. And if Chelsea had stability and improved on what they started to do at the end of the season, then I think a lot of people would have had them in the top four next year. Now I look at it and go, well, I don't know what to expect again. They've gone back to being a basket case. So it's bizarre logic. And if I was a player there, and a lot of them now will be working under their fourth manager, having not actually been at the club for that long. You only need to have been at the club for 3 years, and this will be your fourth manager. That's ridiculous, isn't it?
It's a bit scary to think that Chelsea are meant to be trying to stabilise themselves, and they've invested a lot of money in players. I'm guessing terminating contracts of managers isn't cheap either, although I've heard it's mutual agreement between the two parties, because Pochettino just fundamentally disagreed with the direction the club was going to go. In which case, fair play to him. I think he recognised that it wasn't going to be an easy season for him to please the owners. But I think as a Chelsea fan, if that was me, I've seen some Chelsea reactions online, Dave, and they've been really kind of quite hopeful for this season. So, I mean, where do they go next? If they do go for Maresca, do you think it will fundamentally change their style based on what you've seen with him at Leicester? Or do you think it will be him trying to continue the work that Pochettino has done so far? Because it's kind of uncertain, really, at the minute.
I do think it's a slight change in direction. And it seems like you mentioned there's been a disagreement there between Pochettino and the Chelsea board, and whether he wanted a little bit more control over things than perhaps he was getting. And that it seems like that's what the issue was. I feel like he's going to be in a bit of a sort of a position where he's probably going to be a bit of a yes man, because let's be honest, what Chelsea have done over the last couple of years, we've been baffled by it, really. And it's become a circus. And I think you kind of got to sympathise in a way with Chelsea fans, because they don't really know where they're being led. I think the direction that they're going in is really kind of confusing. Just when they were obviously really playing well, actually performing really well, and have some players come back from injury as well towards the end of the season. Let's not forget they've had a lot of injured players, and I think he's actually struggled a little bit, Pochettino, at times during the season. But they actually look really convincing towards the end of the season, and that's the thing now, is that all that good work's kind of it's gone in the bin, hasn't it?
Come the opening game of the season, Mikhailo Mudryk will have played under 4 different managers in the Premier League at Chelsea and scored 5 goals.
What? That's crazy.
They're ridiculous. They're a joke. They're an absolute joke.
It's head spinning, isn't it? It's weird as well how these promoted teams, their managers are being kind of poached, isn't it? I suppose it's a sign of the quality of the young coaches at these clubs.
Well, promoted and relegated.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah. Well, I was thinking more obviously Maresca, and obviously McKenna's being targeted as well. But I think one coach I think's been overlooked is Russell Martin at Southampton, who I think has done a magnificent job getting them back into the Premier League, Dave, don't you? I know the playoff final was not a brilliant watch, but a 1-0 win over Leeds sees them return to the Premier League at the first time of asking. A lot of that squad is a Premier League quality, I think it's quite clear to see. And they needed to bounce straight back. But then so did Leeds in some ways, because they've got so many expensive players on their wage bill. So before we talk about Leeds and their future, Southampton back in the Premier League, do you think that's kind of a worthy addition back to the Premier League? Do you think they are worthy of that status? And are they better than the teams they're replacing?
I don't know whether they're better than Luton, probably. I don't think they are. I think there is work to do with that squad, and it's still a lot of young players in that team as well. I think they'll all have to make additions, and I think they'll be realistic and know that the expectations are, if they can stay in the Premier League, that'll be massive for them. But the last season they were in, they were really underwhelming, and they're going to have to perform so much better than that if they want to stay up. And I think both at Ipswich and Leicester, I mean, Leicester gave them an absolute battering 6-0 in a couple of weeks before the season ended.
That's true. Yeah.
But actually, I thought they actually performed really well in this game. I don't think Leeds' attack turned up on the day. I think they actually got in some really good positions and situations in that final third. But I actually thought Southampton actually defended really well, managed them really well, particularly some of them more dangerous players, the likes of Somerville. And Nonto. I thought they were quite quiet on the whole, to be honest. And it wasn't really actually until Dan James came to the frame they started to threaten a little bit more. So I think Leeds will be a bit disappointed on the hand. But Southampton, to be honest, I think where they have been, obviously they went on that really long run, didn't they, of being undefeated in the Championship. Yeah. They just kind of came... They almost came back from the dead in a way, because they needed. I think a lot of fans anticipated that Leeds would probably be the third team to go on, but what a performance! And it's great to see them back in the league, to be honest, because they've been a mainstay in the Premier League, for a long time, to be honest.
Yeah, I think they've been a very front-footed team under Russell Martin this season as well. They generally dominate possession in most games, and this is one of those games where they actually conceded more possession than they normally would. I think they had fewer than 50% of the ball. But they needed to, really, didn't they? And it just made for a bit of a stale contest. And I think playoff finals tend to be like that, don't they, really, Miles? I mean, I think it's only 6 years ago this week, Villa lost to Fulham in the playoff final. I think that got reminded to me this week earlier on. And I was like, God, yeah, that's been a long journey for Villa, hasn't it? I'm not saying
5 years since we won it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'm not saying that's going to be the same for Southampton, but it just kind of shows that the playoffs can be an absolute lottery, and they just got lucky on this occasion, really, didn't they? Leeds could have scored a few. I mean, Dan James smacked the crossbar with a brilliant shot in one instance, didn't he? Right before the final whistle went. So, yeah, pure luck on Southampton's part in some ways, but you make your own luck when it's this tense.
Yeah, and the defensive structure kind of fell apart for Leeds for the goal as well, didn't it? Armstrong had so much space, and the line stayed far too deep. It was really poor from them, so that was a shame. It's difficult because I feel like this is becoming like the pessimistic part. We started talking about Man United winning the cup, and I just went on to say I have no hope for them. We went to talk about Chelsea getting a manager. I said I got no hope for them. Southampton have been promoted. You know, I'll let you fill the blank in. I don't think they're anywhere near good enough for the league. I'll be honest. They'll shoot straight back down. I think the thing is, you talk about some of those players and say, oh, they're Premier League quality because we're used to seeing them play in the Premier League. But let's not forget, Southampton were terrible in the Premier League for a while and kind of were kept up by a few good players that have moved on since. Like, they don't have Ward-Prowse anymore, for example. There is a reason that the likes of like Bednarek and Jack Stevens are down there at that level, and they probably are in that weird limbo of being too good for the Championship but not quite good enough for the step up. Like Adam Armstrong, for example, he was largely anonymous in his time in the Premier League but looked excellent in this game. So it's hard to see where Southampton kind of go from here. They'll need some heavy recruitment. They obviously got a lot of money in for the likes of Romeo Lavia last year. I don't know how much of that they've got left floating around, but we'll see. I think coming off the back of a season where all of the promoted teams got relegated again, there's obviously a lot of sceptical eyes going to be on the promoted sides this season. And you look at Ipswich and what McKenna has been doing there, and it's a huge jump for League One players to have got promoted again, and then they've got to find their feet in the Premier League. But you trust that coach is good enough to maybe do it. You look at Leicester, they've obviously got some recent history in the Premier League that's outstanding. They've got some money behind them. They've got some good players in that squad. I look at Southampton, I think, you are the Sheffield United of the bunch, aren't you? I don't have much hope for them.
I think what did actually, I think Luton were quite fortunate, really, that so many players were actually made the jump up to the Premier League level. And I think surprised so many people. Whereas I don't think you can afford to take that risk too often. And I do think they'll need to get some additions in.
Clearly.
You mentioned there Adam Armstrong. I think the last time he was in the Premier League, he scored 2 goals in all season.
Yeah, but prolific in the Championship.
Now is it 27 years of age? It was a big talent when he came through at Newcastle. If he doesn't fulfil that potential now, then
But then saying that, look at Solanke. Because we said the same thing about Solanke at first. When he first came into the Premier League, he didn't look up for it. Was great in the Championship. Matured a bit, got older, learned his trade a bit more, and he had a great season. So it's not to say that they can't improve, but I don't know. I don't want to get carried away with them.
No, well, they've had to commit 20 million, I think, to Harwood Bellis now after his loan's been made permanent. There's an obligation to buy. That's a heck of a lot of money to be having to shell out as well. So they've committed that already quite early in the window. But Kyle Walker-Peters, I thought, was by far the best player on the pitch, and he's a definite Premier League player. I quite like Aribo as well. He was quite a tricky option as well. So they've got a few players there that I think
they've
could
recruited
cause
well
problems.
in the past. They've obviously got this tradition of buying Manchester City youngsters. When they had obviously Jason Wilcox there, who obviously knew quite a bit about that academy. So if they can, exploit that loan system again and get a couple of good talented young players in, I think that will do them the world of good. But they need to recruit smartly.
Well, that's the thing with Sheffield United. They sold their best 2 players before they even got to the Premier League, didn't they? They got promoted and then shot themselves in the foot. So let's hope they don't go down that route, Southampton. Before we I ask you a final question to wrap up the pod, guys, can we just have a moment to talk about Vincent Kompany and what's going on there? How has he managed to land the Bayern Munich job, Miles? Because no disrespect to him. I mean, he's got a very clear playing style that was brilliant in the Championship, and Burnley looked great in that season. But the naivety in the Premier League season and the stubbornness to not change until it was too late, really. I mean, what are they looking for, Bayern? What have they seen in him that's made them go, yeah, he's the man to take us forward? Because it also seems like he's like their sixth choice manager as well.
It's desperation, isn't it? Like the amount of people that they were talking about early doors, like they talked about bringing back anyone that's ever been at the club. Basically, Hansi Flick was talked about, Nagelsmann was talked about again. They even talked about doing a U-turn with Thomas Tuchel and keeping him, despite the fact that he's had a very poor season. There was talk of him looking at Emery. There was talk of him looking at De Zerbi. They've moved for everyone. Yeah. I honestly think Kompany was just the first person that picked up the phone after a while. I can't get my head around it. You've asked me an impossible question then. What do Bayern see in this appointment? Obviously potential, but he didn't have the best of times at Anderlecht. He went to Burnley, had a great season in the second tier. Fantastic. Really struggled to get up to the pace of the Premier League. And the thing is, he has a style of play that is correct, but a good coach can get players to fulfill that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there were enough times where I saw Burnley players looking completely lost and not a clue what to do. And there's some technically very good footballers in that Burnley side. They spent a lot of money when they came up, actually. Like, if Burnley had that tradition, didn't they, of doing quite comical transfer announcement videos on social media. Yeah. I feel like I was watching a new one of them every day last summer. So they backed him. And it still failed quite miserably. So, I don't know, maybe we'll be laughing next year when Kompany's just won the Champions League and Harry Kane's got a smile on his face at last. But I cannot say I understand that. And the idea of when you see how Kimmich and Goretzka and Muller have been quite fiery with some of the managers they've had in the past, I'm not sure they're going to take Craig Bellamy's coaching instructions, to be honest.
I think it'd be interesting just to know how far down that list it was. Because the amount of managers that still got linked, Glasner, even Ten Hag, wasn't it, apparently? But, he didn't want to obviously communicate with them while he's still at United. It's such a surprise. Such a surprise.
I think
there was talk that Chelsea looked at him as well.
Yeah, he's highly thought of. And I think it is because he's this Guardiola ex-player who might transmit them ideas. I think he also speaks like 4 or 5 languages, which helps in the dressing room. I think the Bayern dressing room is a bit cliquey and a bit divided from what I've heard. So maybe that's there as well. But yeah, to be that low down the list doesn't really bode well, does it? It doesn't fill you with confidence for the appointment. But hey ho, what do we know about coaching appointments? It feels like every club's got a weird take on what they need at this stage of this strange season, doesn't it? What's happened to the mega star coaches and managers, hey?
Yeah. This summer, the weird merry-go-round of managers and all the clubs that are changing, and then you've just got no idea. Like, I've seen a few people suggested that it feels very Football Manager-esque, and it is true. It looks like you've simmed football for a while, and now Brighton are going back for Graham Potter supposedly, and De Zerbi's jumped and can't find a job all of a sudden.
Wayne Rooney's gone to Plymouth.
Wayne Rooney's at Plymouth. That's a great example. Yeah, this is fiction. Meanwhile, there's one manager that seems quite happy where he is by the looks of things.
Do you know what I think it is? I think it's the obsession with getting a coach in, because obviously Villa has kind of set the trend in getting somebody who they could see unlocking players' ability on the training ground. I think that's what they kind of see in someone like Kompany.
I was going to say, you mentioned Villa with Emery. Well, he's just signed his second new deal in a month.
Oh, wow.
They've just signed him until 2029. And they've changed his position to manager because they're willing to just give him the keys, basically, and take over. And that, to me, that's what happens when you get the appointment right. And we've got it wrong. Trust me. Before we had Gerrard in just before, but we completely brought in as a name, thinking that he was going to get some sort of Klopp-style football going. Then we've gone for the proper approach and brought in a real coach, and it's worked.
Do you think that's because of a change of direction from the board? Do you think they've actually thought, hang on, we need to give him a bit more control, and that's when he's agreed to be like, yeah, I can commit to that. I can.
I'm not sure if it's a change in direction from the board. I think they've been willing to do that for a while. I just think it's as a result of the success that he's had. Like, if you look earlier in the season, they invested heavily in Unai Emery's team in Spain that he was invested in. They obviously are buying into the project. Emery's son was on the bench for Villa in the last game of the season. It's a partnership made in heaven, the club and Emery. It's the perfect level for him. He's kicking us on to something else. And I think when commercially they're trying to improve to kind of keep up with the way that he's built the playing side of the club up to, it makes perfect sense. Like, they've just signed this big partnership deal with Adidas. It's 150 years of the club this year. They've got themselves back into Europe. Well, in what world does this go? I don't want to say this though, because you'll play this back to me. In what world does this go wrong? Like, why is Emery not at Villa in 5 years' time? The only reason is if he goes on to be at Real Madrid or somewhere like that. Because even if Emery got Villa to 10th next season, they're sticking with him. They're sticking with the process. He could do that 3 years in a row, and I think they'd still stick with him. I honestly think that there's enough foresight there to go, this is the guy. And the more you can give him, the more that you tempt him to ignore approaches by teams like Bayern, because he's been there before and it's not worked out when he went to PSG, really. And now he's got something that he can build as his own. And changing that title from coach to manager seems like a confirmation of, we really trust you. Now have it.
Yeah. Do you know what? There's the positive, Miles. All this pod has been turning on a negative, and there he is. Talk about Villa, and there he is. But you're right. I think Villa is one of those clubs where they're so like upwardly mobile at the minute. Everything they seem to do feels like a step in the right direction, and you can't question the decisions they're making at the minute. From the kit deal, qualifying for the Champions League, tying down a really sought after manager to a long-term deal. These are all such brilliant steps to make as a club. I really hope we see that kind of translated in the transfer market as well, Dave, don't you? Because if Villa can get that right again, because they've done it well in the last season, haven't they? Then we're looking at the makings of a great season, hopefully. Again, I don't want to jinx it, Miles, but yeah, it looks really positive.
It's all right.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that in our end of season reviews for clubs, won't we? And sort of have a look at their aspirations in terms of transfer window. I think it's going to be exciting, really. And I think, especially for Villa fans, if you look at the business they've done over the last couple of years, which I think fans could have only have dreamt of, really.
Yeah.
It's actually really exciting times. You just wonder what else is possible.
Well, do you know what's funny? I think a perfect sign of that is the excitement around. It looks like Ross Barkley's coming back. And it's funny because actually, if that had been a year ago, you'd have laughed at that. Like, when he finished his loan spell, there was no Villa fan going, yeah, definitely keep him. Oh, Gerrard will bring the best out of him, keep him. And then we go 2 years down the line. He's had a great time at Luton, obviously, which has really helped him. But you trust that Emery will get that side out of him.
100%.
And will bring him in. All of a sudden, it feels like a great signing and quite savvy. And that's what Villa have done really well. Yes, they spent big money on Diaby and Torres, but in between that, they've managed to get the clever signings done as well for much cheaper. Morgan Rogers, 8 million, absolute steal. Brilliant, when you consider it now. Tielemans and Kamara on free deals, brilliant transfer dealings. So it's nice to know that even if this summer we find ourselves a bit more restricted in budget, there are still smart buys out there. Like, it looks like we're going to bring Carlos Soler in from PSG. It looks like Hermoso's coming in from Atletico, both on free deals. So I trust that Emery will bring the best out of those players, and all of a sudden the squad's getting that depth that it needed.
Not only that, Miles, but another end of an era, Philippe Coutinho finally coming off the Villa wage bill. That feels like, a change of era as well, doesn't it, in some ways? Yeah,
do you know what, though? It's funny, because I was talking to a few Villa fans about this on Twitter the other day, actually, that how do we look back at Coutinho and his time at Villa? And actually, I think all of us will think of it quite positively, despite the fact that it didn't work out in this kind of magical fashion. I feel like that was one of the first steps towards Villa kicking on to that next level. The idea that we even could bring a player like Coutinho in was amazing. And the excitement that it brought to the fan base was only really replicated once Emery came in. Yeah. And that in itself was huge. Plus, there was some absolute moments of magic. Like, the goal against United when he first came into the side was incredible. And he really showed that he had that flair. And I wish it had worked out more long-term for him. And who knows where we're going. It looks like he's going back to Brazil, and who knows how that will go for him. I am disappointed that it wasn't more of a long-term thing, but I'll love Coutinho now. I think he's brilliant.
Yeah, we'll go down in sort of Villa cult hero status, won't he, going forward?
I think so,
which is a nice way to kind of round it off. Yeah, probably. Nice way to round off his career in some ways, that he hasn't left as a spare part in a former Gerrard team. He's almost kind of been given the chance to have a platform elsewhere, build his reputation back up, and he's maybe going back home. Who knows? So we'll see. But a question before we wrap up the pod, guys, to each of you. Obviously, United finishing the season in 8th, Dave, but winning the FA Cup, and Villa trophyless, but qualifying for the Champions League. You can't turn your nose up at that. Both huge achievements. what would you prefer, Dave? Would you swap places with Villa and qualify for the Champions League and give the FA Cup back? Miles, would you trade a top 4 place for the Europa Conference League? Is a trophy that important? Because, I mean, I'm really buzzing over the FA Cup right now. It feels like something you can kind of hang your hat on, and, you know, my kids watched it with me, and we can talk about the FA Cup final now for years, but you'll never talk about qualifying for the top 4 in the future. Do you know what I mean? What are you feeling?
Disagree.
Miles? Go on then.
Villa fans will be talking about this for a long time, and you look at the buzz around the club that Emery's given because we've had sustained success across a season. United fans will not look back at this season and go, yeah, that was a really good season because of that one game. Because even the FA Cup run was a bit tainted by the Coventry game. They'll remember this season for the year they came 8th, not for the trophy in the long term. Maybe it's because United have got so many trophies in their history that this one won't feel as significant. And for some clubs who don't win things very often.
We beat City in the final. That's huge, man. That's probably the perfect recipe to remember in the final. Definitely.
I honestly, I hate to say it, Mike, that's a sign of where United are right now, that's huge.
Maybe.
I don't think it's even City, though. I think I prefer beating Liverpool. I think when we beat Liverpool in that quarter-final,
that was brilliant.
That was a better moment in terms of... But I think that says a lot about the rivalry between United and City as opposed to United and Liverpool. And I thought, actually, the reaction of some of the City players after the game, it almost felt like their reaction to it, they weren't actually that gutted. I definitely... Looking at how we've performed in the Champions League over the last few years, 10 years even, we've been awful, you know. So we wouldn't win it. We're not good enough. We're not good enough to be in the Champions League anyway.
So what you're saying is you're happier with the FA Cup than you would have been with top 4. Is that what you mean?
Happy with that moment, yeah, for the time being. But you can see it from a Villa fan's point of view as well. Like, you know, it's been over, what has it been, 40 years, 35 years since last in the European Cup? So
I think the context is the thing that matters, because realistically, Man United finishing 4th, some way behind City, is still a bad season, whereas 4th for Villa is an incredible season. Whereas cup football seems very... There's a lot of chance and luck involved in cup football, if we're honest. Obviously, you need to play the fixtures as well as you can, but obviously cup football is very different. So for United, 4th and no cup is a bad season. 8th in the league on its own, terrible season. 8th with the cup, then you've got something to celebrate. But for any other club, 4th all day. Like, if you offered me the chance next season of going and playing Real Madrid, PSG as a Villa fan, that's incredible. I'd take that over a trip to Wembley all day.
Well, like you said, it's a sign of where we are as clubs, because we probably would dread the prospect of facing Real Madrid and the like at the minute. So
yeah, it's not because I think we'll beat them. It's just exciting, isn't it?
No, but you've got a chance. I think you've got a chance ultimately. That's the thing. That's the point.
You said it.
It's become a bit of a meme, though, hasn't it? Like Arsenal, Arteta hasn't won a trophy, obviously in the last 2 seasons, and United have won 2 in the last 2 seasons. You know, who's the happier manager at the minute? Obviously Arteta. So, you know, but it's one thing we try and use over other clubs, that we've got trophies still despite all this, and I think I'll take that right now. On that note, guys, the next trophy we look forward to watching being lifted is the Champions League final, which I'm looking forward to talking about and seeing how Dortmund get on against this stellar Real Madrid team, because it promises to be a really interesting encounter, doesn't it? But until then, thank you, guys. Miles, do you want to give a little call to action to anybody watching or listening?
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate everyone supporting us as we grow the channel. We're looking forward to the new season ahead. There'll be a lot of change for us, I think, and we'll be looking at how we can kick on. So head over to our YouTube page. Make sure you're subscribing to us there. You can keep up with everything that we'll do over the Euros and the new season.
Amazing. Guys, until next week, appreciate your time again. Thanks a lot. See you soon.